Tuesday evening in 2018. The kind of evening that feels safe, predictable, normal. In a modest home in Grand Bay, Westfield, New Brunswick, a mother was doing what millions of mothers do every single day, trying to prepare dinner for her family. The familiar sounds of a typical household filled the air, her kids playing around with their phones, video games, and toys. The gentle sizzling of food in the pan, the distant hum of the television, the occasional creak of the house, and her kids playing and laughing settling into the evening quiet. But what their mother Maggie didn't know was that just a few feet away from her kitchen, in the living room where her 11-year-old son sat innocently playing with his phone, that something sinister was about to happen. Something that would lead to a serious investigation and expose a digital nightmare that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting to prey on the curiosity of innocent children.
A few moments later.
Her son, like countless other children across the world, was playing games on his phone, and then decided to go on Instagram and, I guess, know what's going on there, so he was scrolling through Instagram. Which, at first, it seemed harmless. Just another child navigating the colorful world of social media, looking at pictures, maybe checking out what his friends were doing, chatting and so on, which for me, as an African, I would say he was too young to be on there. So, as he was scrolling through the harmless Instagram, so he thought, then something caught his attention. An account. An Instagram account which looks kind of funny and mysterious. So might ask, why funny? The account claimed to know things. Personal things. Impossible things. It promised to reveal secrets about people just by looking at their profiles. Which seems impossible for a stranger, so the boy thought. The username was I_know_, who_you_r_679, and the profile picture was something straight out of a horror movie. A figure draped in a red hoodie with nothing but an endless, consuming darkness where a face should have been. Out of curiosity, that fatal human flaw that has led to countless tragedies throughout history, the boy decided to engage with this funny, mysterious account. He sent a direct message, probably thinking it was just some fun game, some harmless internet trick that kids his age might enjoy. He asked the simple question that would open the door to a nightmare. Guess who I am? Not knowing he was a message away from what would haunt him and his family for years to come. The anonymous account responded with information that should have been impossible for a stranger to know. Details about his life, his school, his grade. Intimate knowledge that made the boy's blood run cold. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This stranger, how could a faceless entity hiding behind a screen somehow know exactly who I was? He thought to himself. Fear crept up his spine. His hands began to tremble as he stared at the message on his phone screen. The comfortable safety of his own living room suddenly felt violated, like he was watched, contaminated by this digital intrusion. In that moment, the boundary between the online world and his physical reality collapsed completely. The next moment, he yelled out to his mom, "Mom!" his voice cracking with genuine terror. "He knows who I am." He said those 6 words, spoken by a frightened child of that age to his mother, would frighten and scare any mother. Out of fear of whoever that was behind the account, triggered an investigation that would uncover one of the most disturbing digital predator schemes of the modern internet age. An investigation that would reveal how thousands of children had already fallen victim to these digital stalkers, and how an entire generation had become desensitized to dangers that should terrify any rational person. Maggie dropped what she was doing and rushed to her son. When she looked at his phone screen, she felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the autumn weather outside. There, staring back at her, was that horrifying profile picture. The red-hooded figure with the empty void where a face should have been. But it was the account's bio that truly made her stomach turn. "I know who you are," it read. "DM my account and I'll guess who you are. RVMS kids and I can guess some Beaconsfield kids. RVMS, River Valley Middle School, her son's school. This wasn't some random internet predator casting a wide net across the globe. This was someone specifically targeting children from her son's school and the neighboring Beaconsfield Middle School. Speaking of Beaconsfield, made me remember the movie Teen Wolves, which made this whole incident scary for me, although Teen Wolves is Beacon Hills. Back to the documentary. So, from the bio of this account, this was someone who was intimate enough with the local community to know the school abbreviations, the student populations, the daily lives of these children, which made the whole thing more scary, 'cause who knows, he might be around somewhere. The conversation thread between her son and this anonymous predator revealed the sophisticated nature of this digital trap. The account had correctly identified her son's grade level and his school affiliation. When her terrified child had asked the account to reveal its own identity, the chilling response came back. "I can't tell you that." Red flags were going up all over the place, Maggie would later recall, her voice still shaking with the memory. It made me feel like I watched way too many episodes of the following. The reference to the psychological thriller series wasn't accidental, because what she was witnessing felt exactly like the kind of sophisticated stalking and manipulation tactics employed by fictional serial killers. Except this was happening to her real child in her real living room. But as terrifying as this individual incident was, it was only the tip of an iceberg so massive and so horrifying that it would challenge everything parents thought they knew about keeping their children safe in the digital age. As word of the incident spread and investigators began to dig deeper, they uncovered a network of similar accounts that defied comprehension. There weren't just a few isolated predators operating these "guess who you are" profiles. There were hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, each one using similar tactics, similar profile pictures, similar promises to reveal impossible personal information about their young victims. The question that came to my mind while going through this report was, why are they doing this? Is it a prank to scare these kids, or what exactly is their motive on this? Please, before we continue, kindly support and encourage me by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment of where you are watching from and what time it. I'm just a small YouTuber trying to grow my channel and family, which you are my family, and also comment what you'll like me to improve on, okay? Thanks God. Bless you all. Back to the documentary. A simple Instagram search revealed the true scope of this digital nightmare. Account after account appeared, all variations on the same terrifying theme. Many used Guy Fawkes masks as their profile pictures, the same anonymous masks popularized by the hacktivist group Anonymous, and later adopted by countless internet trolls and criminals who wanted to hide their identities while wreaking havoc online. But the Guy Fawkes masks were almost comforting compared to some of the other profile images these accounts used. Shadowy figures with glowing eyes, hooded entities with faces obscured by digital static, computer-generated demons that seemed to stare directly into the camera, and by extension, directly into the souls of the children viewing them. The usernames followed similar patterns: I.know.exactly.who.u.r.dms, your_secrets_exposed, anonymous_knows_all, digital_detective_2018. Each name designed to simultaneously intrigue and intimidate young users who stumbled across them. One account in particular stood out for its sheer scale and influence. The profile I Know Exactly Who You Are DMs had amassed over 80,000 followers. 80,000 children and teenagers who had voluntarily connected themselves to this anonymous entity, giving it access to their profiles, their friend lists, their personal information, and their direct message inboxes. Think about that number for a moment. 80,000 young people. That's larger than the population of many cities. That's enough children to fill multiple large sports stadiums, all of them connected to a single anonymous account operated by someone with unknown intentions and unlimited access to their personal information. But the true horror wasn't just in the numbers. It was in how these accounts operated and how they managed to extract personal information from their victims with such alarming efficiency and accuracy. Cybersecurity expert David Shipley, CEO of Beauceron Security, has spent years studying these types of digital predator operations. When he analyzed the tactics being used by these I Know Who You Are accounts, what he discovered was both brilliant and absolutely terrifying in its simplicity. Tapping into people's curiosity is a great way to build up an online audience, Shipley explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who has seen too much digital evil. It's a classic example of bait and switch. The operation worked like a perfectly orchestrated psychological manipulation campaign. First, the accounts would establish their apparent supernatural abilities by posting vague but intriguing claims about knowing personal details about their followers. The operation worked like a perfectly orchestrated psychological manipulation campaign. First, the accounts would establish their apparent supernatural abilities by posting vague but intriguing claims about knowing personal details about their followers. They would make posts like, "I know which one of you has a crush on someone in your math class," or "Someone following me is hiding a secret from their parents." These posts served multiple purposes. They created an air of mystery and supernatural knowledge around the account. They encouraged engagement as followers would comment, trying to get the account to reveal information about them specifically. And most importantly, they provided the account operators with a steady stream of personal information, as users would often comment with details about their own lives, trying to prove or disprove the account's claims. But the real information gathering happened through direct messages. When a curious child like Maggie's son would message the account asking to be guessed, the account would begin a sophisticated social engineering operation designed to extract maximum personal information while giving back just enough accurate details to maintain the illusion of supernatural knowledge. The process usually began with the account asking seemingly innocent questions. "What's your favorite color? Do you play any sports? What's your favorite subject in school?" These questions seemed harmless enough, and children would answer them readily, excited to participate in what they thought was just a fun game. But each answer provided crucial intelligence that could be cross-referenced with the child's public social media profiles, their friends' profiles, and publicly available information about their school and community. The account operators had become experts at piecing together these fragments of information to create detailed profiles of their young victims. Once they had enough information, the accounts would reveal just enough accurate details to convince the child that they possessed genuine supernatural knowledge. They might mention the child's grade level, easily determined from school-related posts, their participation in specific sports or activities, visible in photos and posts, or details about their friend groups, available through tagged photos and comments. The children, amazed by this apparently impossible knowledge, would become even more eager to engage with the account. They would ask for more information about themselves, about their friends, about their futures. And with each interaction, they would reveal more and more personal details, feeding an ever-growing database of information about vulnerable young people. But the truly insidious part of this operation was what happened next. According to Shipley and other cybersecurity experts, the ultimate goal of these accounts wasn't to maintain long-term relationships with individual children. It was to build massive follower lists that could then be sold to the highest bidder on the dark web. Accounts with a huge following are a valuable commodity that can be sold in the shadowy world of the so-called dark web, Shipley warned. The business model was as simple as it was evil. Use psychological manipulation to build trust with thousands of children, then sell that access to criminals who specialized in more direct forms of exploitation. The buyers of these account lists might be identity thieves looking for personal information to commit fraud. They might be traditional predators seeking direct access to vulnerable children. They might be scammers planning to use the trust built by the original account to sell fake products or services. Or they might be state-sponsored actors looking to influence or manipulate young people for political purposes. This last possibility was particularly chilling because it had already happened on a massive scale. Shipley pointed to the well-documented case of Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election as an example of how this type of social media manipulation could be weaponized for political purposes. Russian hackers created Facebook groups for conservative causes or Christian movements, posting innocuous content relevant to a conservative audience, Shipley explained. Then, as the election ramped up, they started spewing out fake news about the Hillary Clinton campaign because they had a large audience that trusted them. The parallels to the "I know who you are" accounts were unmistakable. Build trust through seemingly innocent interactions, gather a large following of engaged users, then exploit that trust for ulterior motives. The only difference was the target demographic. Instead of focusing on political adults, these accounts were targeting impressionable children who were even more susceptible to manipulation and exploitation. But selling follower lists wasn't the only danger these accounts posed to their young victims. The act of engaging with anonymous accounts also opened children up to a host of other digital dangers that most parents had never even heard of. Doxing was one of the most immediate threats. This practice involved gathering personal information about a target and then publishing it online for malicious purposes. The "I know who you are" accounts were perfectly positioned to carry out doxing attacks, since they had already convinced their victims to share personal details voluntarily. A doxing attack might involve publishing a child's full name, address, phone number, school information, and family details on public forums or social media platforms. This information could then be used by other criminals for harassment, stalking, identity theft, or even physical threats. In some cases, doxing has led to swatting incidents, where criminals make false emergency reports to police in an attempt to send armed response teams to their victims' homes. Cyberstalking was another significant threat. The detailed personal information gathered by these accounts could be used to monitor and harass children across multiple platforms and in their offline lives. Cyberstalkers might show up at their victims' schools, homes, or regular hangout spots. They might contact the children's friends or family members. They might even escalate to physical stalking or more serious criminal behavior. Blackmail and extortion represented yet another layer of danger. Once these accounts had built trust with their young victims, they might convince the children to share compromising photos, personal secrets, or other sensitive information. This material could then be used to blackmail the children into providing money, additional personal information, or sexual content. The psychological manipulation didn't end with the initial contact either. Many of these accounts employed sophisticated grooming techniques designed to isolate their victims from their support networks and make them more dependent on their anonymous online relationship. They might tell children that they were special or unique, for being able to communicate with someone who possessed supernatural knowledge. They might claim that the children's parents or friends wouldn't understand the special connection they shared. They might gradually introduce more and more inappropriate topics into their conversations, slowly normalizing behaviors and discussions that should have raised immediate red flags. "It's all about trust and manipulation," Shipley emphasized, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen countless families devastated by these digital predators. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire investigation was what happened when authorities tried to track down the specific account that had targeted Maggie's son. The Instagram profile I_know_who_you_r_679 had been deleted shortly after the incident was reported, vanishing into the digital ether as if it had never existed. This disappearing act was typical of these operations. The account operators had become experts at covering their tracks, using techniques like VPNs to hide their locations, temporary email addresses that couldn't be traced back to their real identities, and stolen photos for their profile pictures that provided no clues about their actual appearance or whereabouts. But in this particular case, investigators made a discovery that was somehow even more disturbing than if they had uncovered an international criminal network. The evidence suggested that the account targeting children at River Valley Middle School and Beaconsfield Middle School wasn't the work of sophisticated adult criminals at all. The references to specific local schools, the intimate knowledge of school abbreviations and student populations, and the fact that users didn't have to follow the account to get responses all pointed to a terrifying conclusion. The account was likely operated by a student. River Valley Middle School principal Trudy M. G. McGrath confirmed investigators' worst fears in an email to Maggie. "We are certain it must be a student or group of students, since the information shared would only be known to students at the school," she wrote. Think about the implications of this revelation. It meant that somewhere in the halls of these middle schools, a child was walking among their peers while secretly operating a digital stalking operation targeting their own classmates. Someone who sat in the same cafeteria, used the same bathrooms, attended the same assemblies, and maybe even called some of the victims their friends. This student predator had access to information that no outsider could possibly obtain. They knew which students were dating, who was struggling academically, who was dealing with family problems at home, who was being bullied, and who might be vulnerable to manipulation. They had front-row seats to the daily dramas and insecurities of adolescent life, and they were weaponizing that knowledge to terrorize their own peers. The psychological profile of a child who would create and operate such an account is deeply troubling. It suggests a level of manipulation, deception, and cruelty that goes far beyond typical teenage behavior. It indicates someone who derives pleasure from frightening and controlling others, someone who is willing to exploit the trust and vulnerability of their classmates for their own gratification. But perhaps even more disturbing was the realization that this student had probably been inspired by the hundreds of other similar accounts they had seen online. They had observed the popularity and influence of profiles like "I know exactly who you are," DMs, and decided to create their own local version. This suggested a copycat phenomenon that could be spreading to schools across the country and around the world. How many other students were creating similar accounts at their own schools? How many children were walking the halls while secretly operating digital stalking operations against their classmates? How many school communities were being terrorized by predators hiding in plain sight? The investigation into this single incident had revealed a digital ecosystem of predation that was far more extensive and far more dangerous than anyone had initially realized. But the most chilling discovery was still to come. When Maggie talked to her son about the incident in the days that followed, She expected him to be traumatized, upset, or at least concerned about what had happened. Instead, she found something that frightened her even more than the original account. Her son wasn't fazed by it. This reaction, or lack thereof, revealed what might be the most dangerous aspect of this entire digital predator phenomenon. An entire generation of children had become so accustomed to online harassment, manipulation, and privacy violations that they no longer recognized these behaviors as abnormal or threatening. The kids are desensitized to it, Maggie observed, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and terror. Everyone under the age of 22 is completely blasé about the whole thing. This desensitization represented a fundamental shift in how young people perceived privacy, safety, and appropriate online behavior. Children who had grown up in the social media age had never known a world where strangers didn't have access to their personal information, where anonymous accounts didn't claim to know intimate details about their lives, where digital harassment wasn't just a normal part of their daily experience. They had been conditioned to accept that online predators were simply part of the digital landscape, like pop-up ads or spam emails. Annoying, perhaps, but not genuinely dangerous. This acceptance made them incredibly vulnerable to exploitation, because they lacked the healthy fear and skepticism that might protect them from more serious threats. The normalization of digital predation had created a generation of children who were, in Shipley's words, really easy marks for criminals who understood how to exploit their psychological vulnerabilities and their familiarity with online manipulation tactics. But the danger wasn't limited to anonymous accounts operated by strangers or even by fellow students. The investigation had revealed that the techniques being used by these "I know who you are" profiles were being studied and refined by more serious criminal organizations around the world. International human trafficking rings had begun adopting similar social media manipulation tactics to identify and groom potential victims. They would create accounts that appeared to offer modeling opportunities, talent scouting services, or other appealing possibilities for young people looking to break into entertainment or social media careers. These accounts would use the same basic techniques as the "Guess Who You Are" profiles, building trust through apparently supernatural knowledge of their victims' interests and aspirations, gradually extracting more and more personal information and slowly isolating the victims from their support networks through psychological manipulation. Drug dealers had also begun using similar tactics to identify potential customers and distribution networks among young people. They would create accounts that claimed to know which students at specific schools were already using drugs, then use that information to establish contact with potential new customers or dealers. Even more disturbing were reports of accounts that claimed to predict students' futures, particularly their romantic prospects or academic success. These accounts would promise to reveal which students were destined for popularity, which would find true love, or which would achieve success after graduation. The appeal to teenage insecurities about the future made these accounts particularly effective at building large followings and extracting personal information. Some accounts had evolved to offer even more specific and intrusive services. They claimed to know which students had crushes on each other, which were hiding secrets from their parents, or which were struggling with mental health issues. The operators of these accounts were essentially offering to monetize the most private and vulnerable aspects of adolescent life. The business model had become so sophisticated that some criminal organizations were now offering social media manipulation as a service to other criminals. For a fee, these organizations would research a target's social media presence, create fake accounts tailored to the target's interests and vulnerabilities, and conduct extended manipulation campaigns designed to extract specific types of information or achieve particular goals. The global nature of this digital predator network made it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to combat effectively. An account targeting children in New Brunswick might be operated by someone in Eastern Europe, Asia, or anywhere else in the world with an internet connection. The international jurisdiction issues, language barriers, and technical challenges of tracking anonymous accounts across multiple platforms created a nearly perfect environment for digital predators to operate with impunity. Local law enforcement agencies often lacked the technical expertise and resources to investigate these types of crimes effectively. Even when they could identify suspicious accounts, the evidence-gathering process was slow and complex, and the accounts would often disappear before any meaningful investigation could take place. After consulting with several police officers she knew, Maggie made the difficult decision not to file a formal police report about the account that had targeted her son. Because the kids are reaching out to the person as part of this game, there's very little that the authorities can do, she explained. The legal system simply wasn't equipped to handle cases where children had voluntarily initiated contact with their potential predators. This legal gap represented another layer of the problem. Traditional stalking and harassment laws were designed for the physical world, where predators had to make obvious and threatening contact with their victims. But the "I know who you are" accounts operated in a legal gray area, where the initial contact appeared consensual, and the manipulation was subtle enough to avoid triggering criminal statutes. The psychological warfare being conducted by these accounts was incredibly sophisticated, but it often fell short of meeting the legal definitions required for criminal prosecution. The operators had learned to stay just within the boundaries of legal behavior while maximizing their psychological impact on their young victims. Even when law enforcement agencies did manage to identify and prosecute the operators of these accounts, the penalties were often insufficient to deter other criminals from adopting similar tactics. The relatively low risk of detection combined with the minimal consequences, if caught, created a nearly perfect criminal enterprise for digital predators. But perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the entire investigation was the realization that the platforms themselves, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and others, had the technical capability to identify and shut down these predator networks quickly and efficiently. They possessed sophisticated algorithms that could detect suspicious account behavior, identify coordinated manipulation campaigns, and flag accounts that were targeting minors inappropriately. However, the business incentives for social media platforms often conflicted with child safety concerns. Accounts with large followings generated significant advertising revenue and user engagement, even if those accounts were operated by predators. The platform's algorithms actually rewarded the kind of mysterious, engaging content that made these predator accounts so successful at attracting young followers. The "I know who you are" accounts had essentially figured out how to game the social media engagement systems to maximize their reach and influence among vulnerable populations. They created content that was perfectly designed to trigger the curiosity and insecurity that drove adolescent social media usage, and the platform's recommendation algorithms helpfully promoted their content to even more potential victims. Some cybersecurity experts had begun referring to this phenomenon as algorithmic grooming, the process by which social media recommendation systems inadvertently facilitate predator access to vulnerable users. The algorithms weren't designed with malicious intent, but their focus on engagement and user retention made them perfect tools for digital predators who understood how to exploit psychological vulnerabilities. The scale of the problem had grown so large that some experts were beginning to compare it to environmental pollution, a toxic byproduct of digital technology that was poisoning the online environment for an entire generation of young people. Like environmental pollution, the effects were often subtle and long-term, making it difficult for parents and educators to recognize the damage until it was already extensive. Children who had been targeted by these accounts often exhibited changes in their online behavior, their social interactions, and their relationship with privacy and personal information. They might become more secretive about their internet usage, more willing to share personal information with strangers, or more accepting of inappropriate online relationships. Some developed what psychologists were beginning to recognize as digital learned helplessness, the belief that privacy violations and online harassment were simply inevitable aspects of digital life that couldn't be prevented or stopped. This psychological state made them even more vulnerable to future exploitation and less likely to report suspicious online interactions to adults who might be able to help them. The long-term psychological effects of growing up in an environment where digital predation was normalized were still being studied, but early research suggested troubling implications for how these children would approach relationships, privacy, and personal safety as they became adults. As the investigation into the account that had targeted Maggie's son continued to expand, researchers began to uncover evidence of similar operations in schools and communities across North America and around the world. The "I know who you are" phenomenon wasn't isolated to a few criminal organizations or disturbed individuals. It had become a global epidemic of digital predation that was targeting millions of children simultaneously. Reports began flooding in from parents in other provinces, other states, and other countries. The accounts all followed similar patterns, used similar tactics, and targeted similar demographic groups. The only differences were in the specific schools and communities being targeted, and the languages being used to communicate with potential victims. Some accounts had become so sophisticated that they were operating in multiple languages simultaneously, targeting children in different countries with localized versions of the same basic manipulation tactics. These international operations suggested criminal organizations with significant resources and technical expertise, far beyond what most people associated with online predators. The global nature of the phenomenon also revealed how digital predators were sharing information and tactics across borders. Success stories and effective manipulation techniques were being shared in underground forums and encrypted communication channels, allowing predators around the world to continuously refine and improve their operations. Law enforcement agencies began to recognize that they were facing a new type of international criminal enterprise, one that operated entirely in digital space, crossed all traditional jurisdictional boundaries, and exploited legal and technical gaps that made prosecution incredibly difficult. But even as the scope and sophistication of these predator networks became clear, the response from parents, schools, and communities remained largely inadequate to address the scale of the threat. Most adults simply didn't understand how these digital manipulation tactics worked or how vulnerable their children were to this type of exploitation. School administrators often treated reports of suspicious online accounts as minor disciplinary issues rather than serious safety concerns. They might send out generic warnings about internet safety without providing specific information about the tactics being used by digital predators or the signs that children should watch for. Parents frequently felt overwhelmed by the technical complexity of social media platforms and the constantly evolving nature of online threats. Many had given up trying to monitor their children's online activities, either because they felt technically incompetent or because they believed their children were more knowledgeable about internet safety than they were. This generational knowledge gap had created a perfect environment for digital predators to operate. Our children were spending hours each day in online environments that their parents didn't understand, using platforms and applications that most adults had never even heard of, and engaging with strangers in ways that would have been unthinkable in the physical world. The "I know who you are" accounts represented just one example of how criminals were exploiting this knowledge gap to gain access to vulnerable children. But cybersecurity experts warned that this was likely just the beginning of a much larger wave of digital predation that would continue to evolve and become more sophisticated as technology advanced and children became even more integrated into online social environments. The investigation that had begun with a single frightened child calling out to his mother while she cooked dinner had revealed a digital ecosystem of predation that threatened millions of children around the world. It had exposed fundamental weaknesses in how society protected young people in the digital age and highlighted the urgent need for new approaches to online safety education, law enforcement, and platform accountability. But perhaps most importantly, it had demonstrated that the innocuous-seeming social media interactions that had become normal parts of childhood were actually complex psychological manipulation operations designed to exploit the natural curiosity and social needs of young people for criminal purposes. Every parent who heard this story was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their children were living in a digital world where predators had unlimited access, sophisticated manipulation tactics, and very little fear of consequences. The safe boundaries that had protected previous generations of children, physical proximity, adult supervision, and community oversight, had been rendered largely meaningless in the online environment. As Maggie Coffin Prowse reflected on the incident that had shattered her family's sense of digital security, she realized that her son's encounter with the "I Know Who You Are" account was not an isolated incident or a rare stroke of bad luck. It was an inevitable consequence of allowing children to navigate a digital world that had been designed by and for adults, without adequate consideration for the unique vulnerabilities and needs of young people. The red-hooded figure with the empty black void for a face that had appeared on her son's phone screen had become a symbol of something much larger and more terrifying than a single anonymous account. It represented the faceless nature of digital predation, the way that criminals could hide behind avatars and usernames while gaining intimate access to children's lives, thoughts, and vulnerabilities. But the true horror wasn't in the mysterious profile picture or the anonymous username. The true horror was in realizing that somewhere out there, right now, thousands of other children were having similar encounters with similar accounts. They were sharing their personal information, engaging in conversations with anonymous strangers, and gradually being drawn into digital relationships that could lead to exploitation, manipulation, or worse. And most of those children, like Maggie's son, wouldn't even recognize these interactions as dangerous. They had been conditioned to accept digital predation as a normal part of growing up online. They had learned to navigate a world where privacy was a luxury, where strangers claiming impossible knowledge was commonplace, and where anonymous accounts promising to reveal secrets were just another form of entertainment. The investigation had revealed that protecting children in the digital age would require much more than traditional approaches to safety education or law enforcement. It would require a fundamental reimagining of how online platforms were designed, how digital privacy was protected, how children were educated about online risks, and how society balanced the benefits of digital connectivity with the need to protect vulnerable populations from exploitation. As cybersecurity expert David Shipley had warned, the internet is not a one-way consumption method, like television. This is a two-way relationship with information exchanged. That's where the risk comes in. The children growing up in the social media age were entering into thousands of two-way information exchanges every day, often without understanding the potential consequences of sharing personal details with strangers. They were building digital relationships that felt real and meaningful to them, but which might be carefully constructed facades designed to exploit their trust and vulnerability. Folks who aren't streetwise to the digital world are really easy marks, Shipley had observed. But the tragedy was that the people who were least streetwise to the digital world were often the ones who spent the most time there. Children and teenagers who had grown up with social media and assumed they understood its dangers because they were fluent in its basic operations. The "I Know Who You Are" accounts had revealed a crucial gap between digital literacy, the ability to use online platforms effectively, and digital wisdom, the ability to recognize and avoid online dangers. Children might be expert users of Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and other platforms while remaining completely vulnerable to sophisticated manipulation tactics employed by digital predators. This gap had created what some experts were calling a digital perfect storm, a generation of highly connected, socially engaged young people who possessed advanced technical skills but lacked the life experience and psychological development necessary to protect themselves from exploitation. The story of Maggie Coffin Prowse and her son represented millions of similar stories that were playing out in families around the world every single day. Parents who thought they were keeping their children safe by bringing them inside, locking the doors, and monitoring their physical activities were discovering that the greatest threats to their children's safety were coming through the devices they carried in their pockets. The digital predators didn't need to lurk in playgrounds or hang around schools. They had direct access to children through social media platforms, gaming systems, messaging apps, and other digital tools that parents often encourage their children to use for educational and social purposes. As the investigation concluded, one fact became undeniably clear. The incident that had begun with a frightened child calling out to his mother while she cooked dinner was not an ending. It was a beginning. It was the beginning of a much larger conversation about how to protect children in a digital world that had evolved faster than society's ability to understand and regulate it. The red-hooded figure with the void for a face might have disappeared from Instagram, but the threat it represented continued to evolve, adapt, and find new ways to reach vulnerable children. And until parents, educators, law enforcement, and technology companies found more effective ways to address this growing digital epidemic, millions of children would remain at risk of encountering their own version of that terrifying anonymous account. The question was no longer whether this would happen to other families. It was how many more children would fall victim to these digital predators before society developed effective strategies to protect them. And whether the next child who encountered one of these accounts would be brave enough to call out to their parent, the way Maggie's son had called out to her that evening in 2018, when he realized that someone he had never met somehow knew exactly who he was. Please like and subscribe and also comment where you are watching from.